I'm Debbie Woodbridge and I work alongside Tom and Jerry. Welcome to Stop Trying to Sell. In today's new hybrid world, brilliant salespeople need to adapt and not rely on outdated sales techniques. And this session is going to help you do just that. Today's Q&A is for anyone who touches sales. Salespeople, sales managers, entrepreneurs, sales support, consultants, and partners in professional service firms. I'll be hosting today's event. It's pre-recorded to ensure we respond to as many of your questions as possible, and of course stick to the 45 minutes that's scheduled. So, for some of you it's Wednesday the 25th of May, but for some of you, you may be watching this at a later date. But welcome everybody. There'll be no slides. The focus is entirely on you, our audience of people connected to sales, and of course answering your questions. So make yourselves comfortable, grab a pen and paper, as there may be some tips, tools and ideas that you want to jot down. Thank you so much for all your questions. Unfortunately, there are just too many to answer in one session. So if yours isn't answered, we apologise and we'll try and respond privately. Now, some of you will know Tom Bird and Jeremy Castle well, and for others, this will be your first taste of Tom and Jerry. So, a little intro. They have been working together for almost 20 years. They're consultants, trainers, keynote speakers and coaches focusing on three core areas: selling, you'll be pleased to hear, influencing and presenting. They work typically with both large corporates as well as professional service firms, although they have worked alongside startups and entrepreneurs too. In their spare time, they write business books. They have collaborated on 4. The ones that have been most successful are The Leader's Guide to Presenting, which was UK Business Book of the Year for Personal Development in 2018, and of course, Brilliant Selling. And the 3rd edition is officially launched today, with 35% new content and 7 new chapters. It has previously sold over 70,000 copies and been translated into 14 languages. Okay, so we're setting up a reciprocity loop here. We give you this session for free, which we believe will be practical and help you improve your sales results. And you buy Brilliant Selling today from amazon.co.uk, either the book for $14.99 or a Kindle version for just 99p. If you're watching this after Wednesday, 25th of May, and you believe this adds value to your current role, then please go ahead and buy the book from Amazon. It's not too late. So the massive challenge for you guys, Tom and Jerry, is: will you deliver 99p worth of value? Let's hope so. Okay, let's dive into the questions. We've got a lot of questions and not much time, so we'll get through as many as we possibly can. And let's focus on the practical. What can people actually do? What action can they take? Is that fair, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just some people are happy to be named, others prefer to remain anonymous. So here goes. Question 1. How come you ended up writing Brilliant Selling?
Well, that is a good question. And I guess we wanted to write a book as a credibility marker, really. Yeah. It was a way of being more credible with our target audience, to have the authority of being experts in a particular field. And I think more than that, though, as we got into the project, it allowed us to do a lot of original research.
Yes.
And that research allowed us to get much deeper knowledge about that subject matter. So we for the first book, we interviewed, I think it was a couple of hundred highly effective salespeople who had to meet certain criteria. And we did a similar exercise with the 3rd edition to reference the difference in the sales environment since the last edition came out.
And of course, it wasn't actually meant to be a sales book. No. It was meant to be a sales management book, because we felt initially there were lots of books on sales, lots of books on management, but very few on sales management. However, that didn't actually work out because we didn't get any offers on sales management. I'll explain on that in just a second. We got quite a few offers to write several books, but none that really floated our boat. And then finally, we got an email from Pearson saying, "We love your book, we love your style, the first chapter's great, come and meet us." We got into the room, and I'll spare you the whole story, but essentially they told us, "We don't believe there's a market for a sales management book." And of course, it was a classic sales situation, wasn't it, Tom?
Absolutely.
Because we could have just folded, we could have walked away with our tails between our legs, but what we actually did was we asked a few questions. We said, one of us said, what other books are you going to publish? And we got into a conversation. They said, well, brilliant selling. And then we said, well, what would have to happen for us to win this commission? And they told us. We met the criteria. We booked into the Charing Cross Hotel. We spent 2 days writing the first chapter and an overview, and we got the commission. So that is the story of how we wrote Brilliant Selling.
Fantastic. And the next question, why write a third edition?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, but I mean, there's not anybody watching this either live or on the pre-record that has not lived through substantial change over the last 3 years. So we're all working now. Pretty much everybody here will be very familiar with the hybrid world. You know, we're not back in the office full time, and it's a very different place. So how is it different? Well, almost all businesses have been impacted by the pandemic. You know, there is a huge rise in the need to do more social selling and to build a personal brand for yourself, because we're not having as many face-to-face meetings as we used to.
I mean, and beyond that, which I think is absolutely true, the modern buyer has become even more sophisticated, intolerant, especially of salespeople, and price sensitive. Would you agree? And so procurement and the procurement process has become pretty much commonplace for many people on the call, having to meet that. And the reality is that lots of old school ideas around sales that are potentially linked to manipulation are no longer acceptable, but more importantly, just no longer work really. So to be properly successful, we need to adapt. We need, and the reality is that many of our global clients that we work with are struggling with the same things as you know, all of you in the audience are struggling with. So we just thought changes in the air, and we needed to update and fill it, the second edition of Brilliant Selling, to bring it up to date, to help people like you, salespeople like you, to meet these new challenges and many, many more challenges that you're facing right now.
So the next question is from Ian Holt, who's a technical sales manager. He says, I'm intrigued by the title of your session, Stop Trying to Sell. What should we be doing?
Thank you very much, Ian. I know Ian very well, so thank you for contributing, Ian. I appreciate that. So look, you think about it, selling is any transaction in which money is exchanged for a good or a service, or goods or a service. And when we're doing training, Tom and I have a similar sort of approach, whether we're together or doing it separately. We often say to people, who here likes being sold to? So just think about that for a second as you're listening to that question. Typically, about 95% of people say, no, I don't like being sold to. And then we say, okay, so what happens when you know someone is selling to you? What happens? And when we're using something like Mentimeter or in a face-to-face situation, we typically get lots of reaction, and almost exclusively the reaction is negative. It's about being resistant, defensive. We don't trust the person. We don't like to connect with them. We dry up, you know, we just want to get out of there. Almost always a negative reaction. And so no one likes, or very few people like being sold to, and yet everyone is open to influence. And at the foundation of influence is three things: confidence, credibility, and connection. You've got to be personally self-confident. You have to be credible, which is about knowledge, experience, expertise. And you've got to connect with people. You've got to build rapport with people, because people still want to do business with people they like and trust.
Yeah, and I think now more than ever, it's important to take an approach to your selling, which is about attracting people to you rather than pushing something to them. And I'm sure we'll say more of that as we go on. But fundamentally, if influence is really important, and we believe it is, rather than a pushy act of selling, then perhaps where we should be spending our time is on creating the mindset within the individual that we're looking to as a potential customer for our services or goods, creating that desire for them to be open to our message. And that's a concept called persuasion, which we talk about in the latest edition of the book. And it's very much about the fact that what you say first to somebody prepares the ground for how they receive what you say next. So rather than just focus on a sales message, we've got to create that desire so that people are open to the message before we deliver it.
Absolutely right.
Okay, the next question is from Alison Kavanagh. She's a sales development manager for Univar Solutions. What is the best way to break the stigma that salespeople are pushy? And we also have a linked question to that.
Okay.
From Malcolm Tullett.
Malcolm Tullett. Yes, I know Malcolm.
Malcolm Tullett, I do apologise. I've always been concerned that selling, to me, is a process whereby the seller attempts to convince or sell to the buyer the other benefits of their offer. How do you get away from this?
Great. Well, I mean, the first thing is stop being pushy. Nobody likes to be pushed to. So as Jerry has already mentioned, you know, most people don't want to feel as though they're being sold to, but there is an honesty in the buyer-seller relationship.
Yes.
The seller knows that they are there to sell something. The buyer knows they're there to buy something. So as long as there is an element of interest, there is a recognition that this is a commercial conversation and a commercial relationship. But I think the clue to where we need to look first is in the wording of those questions. So if I feel like I'm being pushy, that mindset that I go into that interaction with is of course going to impact on the behaviors. And if my mindset is I'm feeling that this is pushy, I'm probably going to adopt behaviors which show me to be a little more reticent.
Yes.
Maybe not asking the right questions, maybe staying on the safe ground of my product knowledge. And of course, what that's going to do is it's going to impact the result that you get. So I think this link between mindset, behavior and result is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing to do here is to put yourself in your customer's shoes or your prospect's shoes. You know, if you were in the shoes of your customer or your prospective customer, who would you want to buy from? You know, most people want to buy from people they know, like, and trust. I know that's, you know, nothing new, but I think it's especially important nowadays because, and Penny Power says this a lot in her book, Business is Personal. I think business is personal.
Absolutely. And I think even more than that, you know, if you think about feeling that sales is a pushy thing,
yes,
that act of pushing is a very physical thing. Now, when Jerry and I do training together with groups of salespeople, often we'll do an exercise. We'll get them into pairs, and round one of the exercises, person A has to try and push person B into a particular position of the room where they want that person to go to. And it's hugely difficult. It rarely works out for the best. But then when we swap the role, person B needs to pull person A to a particular point in the room. Far easier to do that. So having that physical metaphor in mind, I think is a big clue to what we should be doing. Rather than trying to push, we should be trying to pull people along. And when you're trying to pull people along, the best tool you've got for that are asking intelligent questions.
And then really listening, and properly
really
listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks, guys. The next question, Sam Taylor, who's a senior account manager at Taser UK. What's the best method for identifying and contacting the decision maker in these ever-evolving times?
Yeah. And this right is at the core of the fact that this hybrid world has meant that there is less face-to-face connection, and sometimes that face-to-face is, as we are today, through cameras. I think the thing to start with here in answering this question is to recognise that locating those decision makers is a task that is important and not urgent. Often as salespeople, we get into the sexy stuff. We love the face-to-face meetings. We don't mind doing a bit of prep, but we're not really engaged with that.
You're better at prep than I am.
Of course. I like doing the proposals. I like getting in front of people. But really, the key here is that you have to commit time. And if you're not motivated to put that time in, as very few of us will be, you've got to have focus and discipline. So focus and discipline, avoid selling too early, understand the landscape. And I think you've got to understand, you've got to put that time in, and you've also got to understand not just who the buyer is here, who the senior decision makers are, who are the gatekeepers, who are the influencers, and spend your time mapping those things out. Time spent on those aspects will yield results later on in the sales cycle.
Great. I think that's very well put, Tom. And I think if you're not sure about who the key decision maker is, think about your best accounts, think about your top accounts and model those. In your best accounts, who is the key decision maker? And as Tom said, who are the gatekeepers, the influencers, and the buyers or decision makers? So think about who you're already doing business with and map that across, because probably there's going to be a lot of similarity. Tom's already talked a lot about research. I think that's critical. You can do that through LinkedIn, through company accounts. There's plenty of different ways to do that right now, of course. And I think that the final thing, think about the question there: what's the best method of identifying and contacting the decision maker in these ever-evolving times? Find out from LinkedIn, because that's probably the most obvious way of doing it, who else that person knows, who are the mutual connections. Because if you can find out someone who can then introduce you, that third-party introduction is incredibly powerful. So the power of being introduced by a third party rather than doing a cold call or dropping an email or whatever is much, much better. So try and find ways of being introduced by someone else to a decision maker.
Okay. Next question, Charlie Sims, Head of Sales for Prodigy Snacks. What is the right amount of contact when generating leads, i.e. frequency, what method, to ensure that you are front of mind, but not being a pain in the backside to the buyer? And also a question that's linked to that from Abby Broadley, who's a consultant. And what would you recommend as follow-up to a sales lead that has gone silent?
Great questions. And of course, any answer to these questions is going to be context dependent.
Yes,
because different products, different services require different numbers of contact points with a client or a customer. But I think one thing that is probably universally true here is that salespeople often give up too soon.
Yes.
And it links back to that idea of mindset. If we feel we're being pushy, that's not going to encourage us to stay in contact with our customers, with our prospects. The reality is, research would say that most sales require between 5 and 7 contact points between that buyer and seller. And most salespeople give up after 2 or 3. So it's almost like that Pareto principle of 80% of the sales are left on the table for the 20% of salespeople who are prepared to follow up.
I think about Burberry. We did some work, 6 or 7 years ago with Burberry. We were determined for them to become a key account of ours. And the process took 18 months before they actually gave us our first piece of work. But we went in to see their second in command. And his point to us was, well, if you can deliver coaching and training as well as you can write, I'll give you the work. Yeah. And an hour and a quarter later, we got the work. But it took 18 months and probably 14, 15 touch points before we got the work.
And I think what was central to that was that for Jerry and I, every touch point in our mind, we're thinking, what are we going to do in this touch point to advance the relationship? Yes. So how can we add a little bit more value? How can we bring a little bit more insight? The danger for most people trying to sell a product is they are boundaried by their technical or product or service expertise. And if that's the only way you're going to add value to a client, you are going to lose a lot of sales.
So that's a critical principle, actually. Yeah. Always look, whatever stage you are in the relationship, whether it's a prospect or a great account, and one of your key accounts, always look for ways of advancing the relationship, because otherwise you get stuck in comfort zones and you don't move on. Just thinking about answering that question in a different way, what some specific tips. The idea that I want to talk about first is this. It's a simple one. People buy emotionally, then justify logically. It's not the other way around. So one of the ways you can approach this is to think, what can I do to create an emotional connection with your prospect or your account, your key account? So the sorts of things you can do there to create emotion, as in, God, I'm really pleased to see Tom and Jerry. I'm delighted they've called, or one of them has called. So you get that positive emotion when you get contact with someone, is to do things like send a personal video. How often do salespeople do that? Very seldom. Just take your time and do it on WhatsApp, via LinkedIn, whatever you're going to do, whatever platform you want, and do a personal video. Hi, great. I was thinking of you the other day, and I thought about this. And 30 seconds to a minute, that's all it needs to be. But it's like most people go, oh my God, someone's bothered to do that and take their time out in their day. Ask more questions about the buyer. So that's another a really great way of not being a pain in the backside. Talk more about the needs, the pain points, the bruises that you've uncovered. Constantly send added value stuff. And when we work with Burberry, for example, again, using that same example, we sent them stuff on coaching, on mentoring, on about 3 different things. We gave them a freebie as well, in order to advance the relationship.
Yeah, and the key is you're open to the fact that your agenda may not be their agenda.
Quite.
So get interested in what their agenda is. If I'm adding value to you in something other than the product or service area that I'm looking to sell, that is still building my credibility, and it is moving me away from being perceived as an expert. I think the only other thing I would say is that authenticity is critical here. And so if you're worried that you're not quite sure how to connect with somebody, you're not quite sure what the right approach is,
ask them.
Absolutely. There's nothing to stop you saying, look, I'd really like to stay in touch with you. What's the best way for me to do that?
How should I do that? Yeah, exactly. Good.
Okay, next question. Robert Clay from Marketing Wisdom Online Limited. It's fairly straightforward to generate leads, but how can you accelerate the process to conversion via engagement and education?
Well, this is interesting because
our old friend Robert.
Robert, yeah, it's lovely to have a question from Robert. But I'm smiling because it's taken me back to a very recent purchasing decision I made. So, you know, I like my photography, and I decided I'd get into the world of drones. So, buy a drone that I could fly, take some great movies, some great stills with, and of course, what ended up happening was I bought the product without engaging in a conversation with the manufacturer at all, as so many of you will recognize that will be true for you. But what I noticed was that the drone manufacturer's website only gave me certain information. It gave me specifications, it gave me, you know, marketing videos about how good this could look and how I could bask in the reflected glory of this wonderful stuff that I was going to be achieving with it. But what I really wanted to know before I bought that drone was, what was it like to own one? What were the things they weren't saying that it'd be really helpful for me to know about before I made that decision? So where did I go? I go to where my son and daughter go, which is YouTube. Everything's on YouTube.
Of course it is.
And what I found there were lots of really, really useful channels that gave me exactly what I needed. So in answer to that question around how do you accelerate the process of conversion via engagement and education, it is about really listening to what your potential purchasers want, and not just giving them the sales features or the sales benefits, perhaps understanding that really what's going to hold them back is an uncertainty about what it's like to own this product, what it's like to experience this service. So I think that's a key here, not just education, but education that is targeted absolutely at the needs that are not met by the other channels that you're operating at the moment.
Yeah, and of course, another way to really focus on engagement and education is through social selling. For a lot of you, it will be through LinkedIn. Some of you may do this through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and so forth. But most of you will be on LinkedIn, I would suspect. And I remember someone saying to me once, "So Jeremy, why do you always share your best content on LinkedIn?" And my point to them was, that is the way to engage and educate. That's how I've won myself, and also Tom's the same, work with him, by sharing content that deliberately engages and educates our target audience.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if you read anything by Seth Godin, who's a marketing guru, he will talk about the danger of this interruption marketing. Our lives are so constantly interrupted by emails, by junk calls, all of that stuff, that the only way you're going to engage people and build relationship is by constantly adding value, and adding more value than you think you need to before there is any ask for anything in return.
Yep, absolutely right.
Okay, great. You guys get a lot of questions about moving from to hybrid and virtual selling. So we've picked one. How can we ensure relationships still prosper with more and more business being conducted facelessly and online?
Yeah, good question, and very, very similar to questions we are asked day in, day out. And I think the start point is we have to accept this new reality. Yes. I think a recent study by Forbes said 95% of CEOs say that business travel is never going to go back to how it was before the pandemic. So that is a reality. And we need to adapt to that as salespeople. We need to recognize that people still ideally buy from people, but that our channel of communication may be a little bit different. So I think the first thing is, if the pandemic created hybrid world is here to stay. We've got to get better individually at differentiating using that mechanism. So we've got to think of ourselves more as an advisor rather than just a product salesperson. We've got to upskill ourselves in being able to hold these meetings online far more effectively. Because in a world where a lot of salespeople are the same, we don't have to be hugely differentiated, but we do need to stand out. And that might be in a simpler way as how we engage with the technology we're using.
Yeah, good point. And I think, a lot of our points are practical tips. So just to add a couple of more ideas for you is prioritize your key accounts. You can't probably have face-to-face relationships going forward with all of your accounts, because some will say no, the ones who buy less or buy infrequently. But there will be certain ones, key accounts, who you want to keep a very a great relationship, a really effective relationship. And one of the ways you've got to do that is through ensuring you see them in person. So prioritize your key accounts. You've got to put yourself in their shoes and think, why would they want to see me? Where is the added value? Because if they can keep you at arm's length and not see you, it's easier for them. So you've got to constantly be asking yourself, how am I adding value? Is it because by seeing people, is it because you're introducing new products? Perhaps you want to introduce new people as their business from your company. So those will be two obvious ways in which you'd want to see someone face to face. And one of the things that we learned, we work with a great facilities management company called Sodexo, and what they're really good at is setting up expectations meetings at the start of a contract. So at the start of a commercial relationship, ask the questions like, how would you like us to communicate going forward? Set up the expectations so you have clients for life. And then in that sort of situation, you might want to propose a quarterly meeting. So if you get something in writing, then according to Cialdini, people will act consistently and they're much more likely to follow your suggestion that you meet people, for example, on a quarterly basis. So there's a couple of very practical top tips for you.
And I think just finally on that, because every meeting, the objective for most meetings is actually to always get another meeting. Because you only advance a relationship by consistent contact. And so one way to start thinking about that is, how does this individual or this group of people, how do they need to feel about me and about the proposition of a further meeting in order to say yes to it? So often we plan meetings around the what. Here's what we're going to give you. This is the information. We've got a PowerPoint deck. We've got product samples, whatever it might be. We often don't think about, how does this person need to move emotionally from where they are now so that saying yes to the next meeting is an obvious answer? So think a little bit about that emotional transition, that journey that the prospect's got to go on.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. And this is another one on a similar theme. Okay. Outside of seeing the wider room, what are the biggest weaknesses of virtual selling by video conference?
Well, I'm sure that you, like us, are immensely frustrated with having to deal with so many people virtually. It is very, very, very frustrating. It's difficult to read body language. People get distracted very easily. There's lots of research into how they get distracted. There's 5 or 6 different things that people do on a habitual basis to be distracted. You miss important aspects, and quite pay attention, Tom. You miss important aspects of the relationship. It's when you're not with someone or with a group of people, I find personally it's also less collaborative. Absolutely. Because, that comes from the Latin collaborare, working together. It's much more difficult, I think, to work together if you're not in the same room where you're brainstorming or thinking through options in terms of developing a relationship.
It's how we work. We will occasionally use Zoom, but it's never as effective.
Never as effective if you're doing creative stuff or you're trying to identify options and then deciding what to do as a result. So I think some small things that you can do around this would be keep meetings shorter. That's one of the key things that most effective leaders do. Keep meetings much shorter. Have a purpose for the meeting. How many meetings have you had either internally or externally where there hasn't been an overt purpose or outcome for the meeting? You've got to have a purpose for the meeting.
And say it up front.
And get it agreed beforehand. That's part of persuasion, in fact. We like the idea of having some deliberate catch-up time at the start for like a soft start for rapport building, because you typically do that in person. Why not start the meeting 5 minutes early and have that built in, baked in to your meeting. Use, if you can do, and this does work really well, Mentimeter or some sort of interactive engagement software to get the pulse, especially if it's a team scenario and you're trying to influence a number of people. And one of the things that you'll be noticing Debbie, myself, and Tom doing a lot of is looking into the camera, because that is your virtual eye contact. And I see too many people in meetings or when they're pitching, looking down, looking up, looking around. Focus on the camera lens.
And if you'll also notice, that lens for Jerry and I today is in line with our eye. So instead of having your laptop on the desk and you're looking down, imagine what it feels like to be looked down to by the person who's trying to sell to you. So a small thing of just raising up that camera, you know, we'll both use tripods and we'll put the camera on a tripod. It's really important because you're looking face to face with somebody rather than looking down on them.
Okay, next question from Jack Watson, membership manager at Author Marketing Group.
Yep.
One thing I'm struggling with is on LinkedIn is being stuck in a connect then pitch method, which isn't having the best results. Anything you can advise the above would be really helpful.
Isn't having the best results. What a surprise there, Jack. But look, thanks a lot for your honest question there. And Jack is asking for a different method. So how many of us honestly react in a positive way when someone connects with us on LinkedIn and then immediately tries to either sell us something or sell us the idea of spending time with them when there's been no rapport built and no trust created at all? Very few of us, unless we've got a specific need that someone happens upon. So this is the equivalent to cold calling. And we know in cold calling that it's less than 1% in terms of effectiveness. So my strong suggestion in terms of a principle here is don't do it.
Yes, good counsel, Jerry, because you know this concept, this idea of connect, sell obviously doesn't work. Part of the reason is that you're selling too early. You haven't built rapport. You also don't understand people's pain points. So if there's no time, there's no investment in the relationship, why on earth would I trust you and what you have?
So what are the missing ingredients?
Well, I think there's three. You've got to connect first.
Yep.
You've got to build a sense of community. And I think this is where the link to social selling is so important.
Yep.
You've got to be on LinkedIn. You've got to have people that can look at you and see, here is somebody that's connected. Here is a community of people who are experiencing similar things to me. So you've got to connect, you've got to build community, you've got to constantly add value, something we've spoken about, and you've then got to identify the pain points. Now, if you add value and you identify pain points, you become magnetic, you become the person that they will trust and go to.
And therefore selling becomes easy then.
And then selling becomes easy. So that's the last point of a 5-stage process rather than the second point of a 2-stage process.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
This is a really good question from Nick Managos.
We'll be the judge of that.
From Mason and Wake Global Sales Search. How do you handle this objection? I'm happy with the company we use at the moment, thanks.
Yes, good one. Thank you very much for that one, Nick. Very good, and obviously one that's that you face perhaps in sales recruitment, and I suspect many of you face. So let's have a think about that one. It's pretty tough to shift the incumbent often. So how do you sort that one out? The first thing to say is you're only really likely to get business if 3 things happen, probably. I think it's 3 things. The incumbent messes up. So their service or their product doesn't work anymore. Or you offer more value, or you're better at articulating your value. One of those 3 things have to probably be true. So you've got to ask yourself, what can you control? You can control the extent to which you can articulate hunger. You've got to be passionate. People want you to want to do business with them. Don't give up, because it sometimes takes a long time. We've already talked about Burberry taking 18 months for us. Keep in touch on a regular basis in ways in which it will help the prospect. Focus on value and benefits. Try and develop third-party recommendations and case studies if possible. I'm just thinking about my own days. I started life as a salesman for L'Oreal, and I remember going into a particular account, which was a Kleinel account for many years down in Abergavenny, and I went in there don't need to raise your eyebrows, Tom. And I went in there for 18 months, every single month on my journey plan, and never got an order.
It's called the pity sale.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, quite. Is he really here again? Go, I better give him something. But the reality is I walked in one day and Kleinel had just massively messed up their level of service. And the woman, Sue, said, sit down with me. I want to talk to you now. And I had done a lot of those things. I hadn't given up. I demonstrated hunger. I'd kept in touch. I talked about how we had value at L'Oreal. And because of that, she was eventually prepared to sit down with me.
Yeah, it is that you've got to be in it to win it. You know, you have to stay in touch. I think there was something else that you said that was
Sparked something,
but I think it's completely gone.
Probably the most important thing you didn't learn on this session,
actually. Completely gone.
Shall we move on quickly then, Tom?
Yeah.
This one's from Alison. How do you prioritize if everything is important?
Great
this
question.
Is one for Tom.
But I've also remembered what I should have said at the end of the last thing. You know, in most sales courses, one of the things that they will teach you about objections, because that last question was about objections, was how you think of them will determine your approach to them. And it just made me remember that, you know, an objection is very often a request for more information.
Yes, exactly.
And if you're getting that same objection, it just should encourage you to think about, so what is the information I need to provide to change the...
Or we talk about objections being buying signals.
Yeah.
They could easily just say no.
Yeah.
But an objection suggests that they may possibly be interested.
Yeah. Then it becomes a challenge.
Then exactly.
So this question, Debbie, was about how do you prioritize everything? How do you prioritize if everything's important?
Easy enough for you to say, Tom.
Yeah, and I think the start to this is you can only really prioritize if you're first very clear about your outcomes.
Yes.
You've really got to decide what's important to you, what will move you forward. And I still think with the work that we do, far too few people are good or habitual at setting effective outcomes for themselves. Once you know that, it is about carving out small amounts of time every day. Little and often is much more easy for you to achieve than saying, well, I'm going to create this strategic 5-year business development plan and it's going to take me a day to do. The problem with that is you've never got a day. So the best people at prioritizing, first of all, remember, everything I choose to do should be in service of some really important outcomes. Second thing they do is they take those bigger goals, those bigger chunks, and they break them down into bite-sized pieces. Each of those individual goals in service of the bigger outcome may only be a 15 or 20-minute piece of work. They recognize that these things are often important, non-urgent. And that unless they carve, let's say, 15 or 20 minutes out at the beginning of each day, it's probably not going to happen. So in the absence of having the motivation to do it, they have focus, they have discipline. Once you do that, a simple process from Stephen Covey, I can give anybody who's interested, drop us a DM and I'll send you the handout on this. You've got to first identify the key areas you want to work on, building your profile, building your network, whatever that might be. And then you've got to break that down and say, right, what am I going to do? It's going to take me 15 or 20 minutes in service of those goals. If you do that and you do it regularly, it will make a substantial difference.
Great, thanks, Tom. Next question. What is the most common mistake you see sellers make when engaging with procurement? What are your top tips to succeed with procurement?
Well, let me start with that, because I've seen a swing with procurement over the last 10, 15 years.
It definitely has been.
And it used to be that personal relationship, loyalty, that was often enough to win you a deal, even quite substantial deals. And that pendulum has now swung, and organizations are bringing in professional procurement departments, and they are trained to bubble everything down to a matrix of scoring and so on. And I think what's happened is organizations have got what they paid for as a result of that. And low cost doesn't always mean best value.
Quite.
So the pendulum is swinging back, and I'm definitely seeing a move back to a much more balanced approach where procurement's really important, but so is value to the stakeholders that are going to be using the product or the service. So procurement aren't necessarily in total control, and I think that's an important thing for us as salespeople to recognize. But it does mean that what we've got to do is take on board the challenge of dealing with procurement. We've got to engage with them. We've got to form a relationship. We've got to understand what's important.
And think about those relationship elements. Working with a facilities management company a few years ago now, I was told this story, that they had gone for a deal, which was a 5-year contract. And there were 4 people going for it, pitching for it. And they came second. They lost, and they were called by the decision maker and said, "I'm really sorry. We really enjoyed meeting you, but you've come second." They were called again 2 days later to be told, "Actually, we've decided to go with you." And although objectively they had scored less and so hadn't won from an objective point of view, they said, "Look, we reflected on this and we recognize that actually we like you more. Our commercial relationship, which is going to be so important over the next 5 years, is pivotal to this. And we think we're going to get on better with you. So you've got the deal."
Absolutely. And there are just a few common mistakes that people fall into when they're dealing with procurement. They either don't follow the process, and there's nothing procurement like less than you not trying to follow the process that they have, or you don't match their map of the world. You know, they've got a different view on what's important. So you've got to be able to be interested in that, genuinely interested in what their map of the world is. You've also got to make the time to build some rapport with them.
Yes.
They're people as well. They need a relationship if they're going to be able to move a process forward with you. And then finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, we don't challenge enough. We've got to challenge procurement. What they say isn't necessarily the truth. We've got to ask more questions. We've got to get underneath the surface and understand what the real needs and desires are.
Yeah, exactly. So there are top tips, I think absolutely right. Identify what the outcomes are of procurement, ask the right questions. So what's important to you about how we work together during this process? What examples do you have of when you've worked successfully with an organization like ours? Those are good questions. And they're all part of developing a adult to adult relationship, which I know you're thinking about talking about later to the final question, which is about developing a relationship of equals, where you are really adding value and collaborating effectively.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to move on swiftly to the last question. How can I demonstrate my knowledge and integrity without selling?
So there's 2 key words there, knowledge and integrity, isn't there? So you've got to think about what is the knowledge that is most valuable to my customer or client, and what knowledge outside my own product or service would add the most value to this individual or this group. And of course, integrity is about acting without self-interest, doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think if you look at a simple way to picture this is, if you think about parent, adult, and child relationships, some of you will be familiar with those terms. Transactional analysis. So often, Jerry and I will see client or customer relationships with salespeople where the salesperson puts the customer up on a pedestal. And if they do that, the customer unconsciously is happy to take that role. And what that does is it positions the salesperson as a very narrow expert with a particular area of expertise. And of course, the customer is only going to come to them for stuff around that particularly narrow area of expertise. What we're trying to create is an adult-adult relationship. And in adult relationship, what we've got is this equality.
Yeah.
We are seen by that prospect to be adding value over and above just our product knowledge. We are seen to be demonstrating integrity, not by taking a short-term sale, but by being honest in response to questions.
Being a trusted advisor.
Being a trusted advisor. And those are the things that I think we absolutely need to focus on. This move from the worry of potentially being a child to the client's parent, putting the client on a pedestal. If we do that and we end up asking for the work, that customer is going to see us as being needy. Nobody wants to buy from a needy salesperson. But if we create this adult dynamic where the customer goes away from meetings with some actions to take as well as us, where if we clearly see there's nothing there in the meeting for us, we don't drag the meeting out to its final conclusion.
Where we challenge the person.
We challenge them. So if we start doing that, and it's an adult-adult relationship, then I think when we ask for the work, we can be seen as being hungry. So when Jerry and I ask for work, if we think we can do a job we will really well, we'll say, look, we really would love to work with you on this. What do we need to do to win this work? Nothing needy about that. That is a hungry, confident expression of desire for the work. And that's a very different thing. So I think we're about done in terms of the questions and in terms of our time with people. So
We
Debbie,
promised 45 minutes. didn't we?
yes, and I think, Debbie, the question we've got to answer is, do you think we've given them 99p's worth of value? If that's
Well, I don't know. I'll let the audience be the judge of that. But thank you so much, Tom and Jerry. And thank you to our audience.
Yes.
Please go out and buy the book, amazon.co.uk, and join our brilliant selling community on LinkedIn, where we'll be answering a lot more questions and sharing a lot more value. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
very
Thanks for
much.
coming along.
Bye.
Take care. All the best.